where there's mystery, there's margin, price of freight went up 5x in the last 2 months as a result of all that.
For 5x?
For Asia to Europe, yeah. 5 times.
Holy mac, 400% increase. Hello, fellow data nerds. My guest today is Ryan Petersen. Ryan is the founder and CEO of Flexport and a partner in Founders Fund. Ryan, welcome to World of DaaS.
Yeah, great to be here.
Excited. Now, there's a Dave Burkus quote I've heard from you many times I love, and it says something like, where there's mystery, there's margin. Can you help us demystify the freight forwarding business a bit?
Wait, where does that quote come from? Who did you say? Dave Burkus?
Dave Burkus, yeah.
I didn't know the source of that quote. I heard my friend say it once and I stole it. So it's good to know. What was your question? Sorry, I got distracted.
No, this is great. Can you help us essentially demystify the freight forwarding business a bit? Like it seems like from the outsider, like super opaque.
Yeah. And you sort of get to that just by the fact that, George Costanza, when he's trying to be the man of mystery in Seinfeld, he what does he do? Vandelay Industries, the import export. The reason that's funny is because the idea of George being mysterious, undercover, understanding this mysterious world is very funny. It is fundamentally, freight forwarding is the problem that you're trying to solve is that a container or a pallet of cargo needs to move across the world. We call freight forwarding international shipping and logistics. And the problem is that the pallet needs to move across the world, but any given company's assets probably only can carry the goods for some leg of that journey.
Yeah, so because there's a ship, and then there's a train, and then there's a trucking, and on all sides, and then there's the last mile. The ship only goes from port to port, but the containers got to go from door to door. So someone has to coordinate the trucks on both sides, the customs clearance. Often the goods are not if it's a full container load, that's pretty straightforward. Although there's also going to be a bank involved because there's a payment getting made. And when does the cargo change title? There's an escrow process involved in that. There's cargo insurance. So even on a simple full container load of cargo, you're going to have 5 or 6 vendors plus government plus banks, et cetera. So, and then a more complex one where it's a pallet that's getting consolidated with other pallets to fill that container, or air freight is always consolidated with other cargo. You just get a lot of vendors in the chain. And so you need somebody to coordinate that complexity. And fundamentally, that is the role of the freight forwarder. Should be, in an ideal, correctly run business, and asset light. You don't need to own the assets. You're the coordinating layer. And therefore, really susceptible to software fundamentally is but the problem is that all these companies run different IT systems. So how do you integrate with all of them? How do you give them interfaces to give and receive data about what's happening? At the end of the day, it's a communication problem to move the data in parallel to the goods. I assume there's some things where there are data standards, but some things where there's completely no standard, and you have to create your own join keys and other types of things to do all these integrations.
Very few standards. The standards that do exist are EDI standards, which are pretty
old
ancient.
School. Yeah,
it's fine. It works. But it's interesting how difficult it is to get alignment. And each customer needs to be integrated in a different form, different ERP systems to connect. And what we found is actually on the supply side of our business, so trucking companies, warehouses, et cetera, there was very little software to even integrate with. In the forwarding business, and the drayage is what we call port trucking, where you're moving a container out of a port. Mm-hmm. Such a small market that has unique requirements in terms of okay, it's different from regular trucking because you're handling a container. You got to go pick up a trailer. You got to return an empty container to the port. There's enough nuance to it that normal trucking software doesn't work for it. And so what we found was there's no good drayage software out there. Similar with these warehouses, there's a lot of great warehouse management systems, but they're always, in our experience, and we've studied the market in a lot of depth, they're all made for picking an item and shipping it out to a customer.
Yeah.
There's very few that are made for hey, you're operating a freight forwarder. You got goods coming in. You need to consolidate it with other goods and ship it back out. And so our approach to the market has been all right, well, if we can't, obviously we want to integrate with other people's software. That's what we do. But in a few of these areas that are core to what we do, we found there wasn't good software to integrate with.
so we went and built software for the supply side. So we've got warehouse management system, trucking, TMS is called, transportation management system for these trucking companies, so they can dispatch trucks, and drivers have a mobile app that helps them manage the container return and the picking up of a chassis, et cetera. So all of that in an effort to get accurate data about what's happening and give the customers at the end customer, the company that's shipping cargo with us, visibility, control are kind of the two keywords. Where's my stuff? When is it going to arrive? How can I make a change if I need to?
Now,
and allow the data to flow in parallel.
I remember in COVID, like there are oftentimes like lines of trucks waiting at a port, and sometimes they'd be waiting for days and stuff, which doesn't make any sense to me. It's like either the pallets available for them, the containers available for them, or it's not. And wouldn't they like know it's available? Like, wouldn't there be like you get a ping, hey, it's available, come pick it up in the next 3-hour window or something? Like, why?
Yeah,
why
and
were
that's
they
part of
all
the problem.
waiting there?
They get these 1-hour appointment slots.
Hello, fellow data nerds. If you're enjoying this episode, please hit that subscribe button. I would super appreciate you being a subscriber to World of DaaS. Now, back to the episode.
At the port to go pick up the container. Most ports in the U.S. have like a 1-hour appointment window, and you've got to show up. And if there's a traffic jam, I mean, you've been places where you've been more than an hour late in your life, probably. It sucks.
Sure.
And you get these positive feedback loops. So because there's a traffic jam, vicious cycle, I should call it. It's not a positive thing, but because there's a traffic jam, they miss their window, and now their container they were supposed to pick up is sitting in the front, blocking all the other containers.
Oh my gosh! Okay, I see.
And you had this compound feedback loop of like, because of the traffic jams, there's more traffic jams.
Yeah. Okay.
And then what happened was there was not enough chassis. Chassis are what we call the trailer that you use to haul the container out.
Mm-hmm.
The wheels on it, and there weren't enough chassis, and we dove deep into this and figured out that what happened was there were so many containers. It was really caused by a surge in demand that people who were locked down or weren't spending money on services and restaurants and stuff were just spending so much more money on goods. So we had this huge increase in the imported containers, and what was happening then was the containers were sitting in yards at the truck yards, and they had a regulation and they still have a regulation in Southern California that you can't stack the containers more than too high in a truck yard.
Yeah.
And so the moment you hit too high in the truck yard, the trailer couldn't be unloaded for that third container. And so they would just leave it on the trailer. And then we ran out of trailers in Southern California to go pick up more. And then the truckers are missing their appointments and like leading to these terrible traffic jams and really broken kind of system. Now, all because of a 20% increase in container flow. And it's a good reminder for those of us who just work in software and data. We're like, yeah, you can increase 20%.
Yeah, no problem.
It's fine.
Yeah. Just throw a few more servers on AWS. Yeah,
but a 20% increase in the physical world can just cause everything to break. It shouldn't. But like the systems are pretty inefficient. Frankly, there's a solution here, which Flexport has the technology for. So it's not it is a solve that's very doable, which is instead of having an appointment system, just have the truck driver show up and with a mobile app that we have, and then just give them whatever container that's available, and it'll tell them where to go, where to take it, and they don't need to worry about appointments and then the goods will flow.
Right. If they could go anywhere, I guess, if they're willing to go anywhere in the country, or basically, or they may have certain constraints. Okay, I'm only willing on the eastern part of the country or whatever.
Yeah, you could set parameters for it, and so most of these containers move locally because if they're going long haul, it will transfer anyways to a dry van, because the container, you don't want to send a container all the way across the country; then you have to drive it all the way back. So if it's going long haul, you usually it's called a transload. You'll unload it onto a regular truck and ship it out. Again, the complexity of freight forwarding.
Okay, got it. So the container itself, because I thought I've seen containers on trucks before, but you're saying mostly that doesn't happen. Mostly they actually get put inside a truck.
You'll see them on trucks, but if they're going long haul, it'll usually go on the rail.
Okay. Yep.
And because of that backhaul, because the empty container coming back is just like not efficient. And containers are, it's a huge inefficiency for the world that the containers are set to the wrong standard. Speaking of standards, the FMC, the federal government, set the standard for ocean containers. I forget, like in this 1970 something, and they set it at the 40 foot. but it's the wrong length because trucks are 53 foot long. So you're losing, what is that, 33%, 13 over 40. For every truck, you could get 13% or 30% more space.
Was it already the wrong length when they set the thing, or has the trucks gotten bigger since then?
I think trucks were 53 foot already at that time. It's possible they got bigger since then. I don't know the history, but the container should be 53 foot long because that's the length of trucks. And you would get a lot more efficiency.
And that's true all over the world, like or trucks in the U.S. bigger than trucks in France or something.
It's the right question. It depends on the country. Like I know New Zealand only uses 40-foot trucks, but they should. If it can be 53 foot in the U.S., it could be 53 foot everywhere. It should be as big as it possibly can be and be safe. Maybe our roads are better. I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, interesting. I can imagine like a third world country where like you need to maneuver more, you need smaller trucks curves, or something.
Yeah. Well, look, you have different standards. You can have 20 foot as well, but the base case 53 foot, you're losing a lot of efficiency there. But that's the reason why you want to transload to a longer truck. So you get more, you move more cargo for one driver.
There's been also a lot of talk about just the U.S. infrastructure in general, how we're underinvesting. Like from your perspective, from like the shipping logistics, like are there things we could be doing better and vis-a-vis, let's say, other countries? And if so, what should we be doing?
Yeah, for sure, the ports are really underinvested. The U.S. ports it's a difficult thing. In the United States, our ports are owned by the local city that they're in.
Yep.
Like the Port of Oakland is owned by the city of Oakland.
Yeah, which is weird because like a lot of things in the U.S. are very, capitalistic, but the ports are still more government controlled.
They lease it to private companies who operate the port, but at the end of the day, like that private company doesn't own the port. They don't own the terminal. How much capex are they really going to want to put into upgrading it? And so that's, in other countries, the ports are considered sort of like a national strategic asset. And at the government. Now, by the way, this morning, the U.S. government announced billions of dollars to invest in new cranes at our ports because our cranes are all made by this Chinese company and they don't like it. But again, it's just so silly. Like, you don't need to replace the crane; just replace the software. Like, the steel is fine. Like, the steel is not
totally
hackable. Like, but I'm sure somebody got a nice contract for their cousins, something.
Some steel company is very happy right now.
Yeah. We do need investment. I shouldn't knock on it, but I'm not convinced they'll be that smart about it. And then generally, like, actually the bigger problem that I see in the U.S. port infrastructure is there's something wrong with the way the union interoperates with the management. I don't want to point fingers at the union. I'm like sort of biased there, but I just generally think there's unions in other countries and they don't have this problem. So it's something about the relationship between management and unions in the U.S. ports in that, it's completely insane. So the port every day on the West Coast, at least, they say, here's how many workers I need tomorrow. And the union just furnishes that many workers, but like different people every day. It's not, and then they're like totally new. There's no like, hey, we're a team and we come every day together and we're a union, you're management, but like it's the same people every day trying to get better.
Sorry. So like one day I could be in a pod with like 7 people I don't even know, and then another day I could be in a pod with another 7 people.
At a different terminal. There's like something like 30 terminals at the Port of LA and Long Beach.
So I don't always work with like the same group of folks that we build camaraderie.
You never do.
Oh, that's
complete
terrible.
randomness.
But that's not even good for the. Yeah, that's not fun for the worker.
It was super dangerous. You're operating heavy equipment in an area that you haven't been to before with like blind corners. There's all kinds of accidents. It's extremely dangerous and just like it's sort of insane. It's completely insane. And so it's very hard. Like, job one of running a team is like, let's have some metrics. Mm-hmm. Let's understand, how did we do yesterday? What did we learn? How are we going to do better tomorrow? Like basic 101 management stuff, like that they can't do. And I don't think this is like a fun inherent in union. Like it's not about me. I mean, it's something around the contracts clearly, but it's also just like, well, you can have a union and represent workers' rights while also like being a team. I'm sure of it. So yeah, there's something off there with the ports.
it seems like the public perception, like if you ever watch a movie or a TV show and there's a port involved in it, it's always like negative. It's never like a positive type of thing. And like, if you think of like one of my favorites is The Wire. I love The Wire, and I love that season with the port and everything.
Season 2.
And it's like, it's not a positive portrayal.
Yeah, I don't know. You don't see a lot of positive stuff coming in media in regardless in general. Point, so it's hard to say. But yeah, there's definitely some flaws out there. Most of which, we could definitely should have been able to handle that 20% increase in volume.
Yeah,
like it's given the inefficiency that we see. And
by the way, I assume like Amsterdam had a 20% increase as well. Like, how did they handle it? Or, some of these other places?
It was a U.S. problem, largely a U.S. problem.
Interesting.
There were some problems worldwide, but not to the extent that we saw in the U.S. One way you can judge for this, for yourselves, viewers at home, is next time you drive by a port, those of you who live by a coast, and you see a container port, you have those cranes. They look like that. In fact, they look exactly like the AT-AT walkers from Star Wars, because that's what George Lucas apparently based it on, was the Port of Oakland. You can see if the crane is facing up at this angle, 45-degree angle upward, it is not unloading any ships. If it's down, it may be unloading a ship. Like, you have to look a little closer to see if there's containers moving. But if it's up, it's definitely not unloading ships. Next time you drive by a port, just count how many of them are up versus down. They're always up.
Most of them are up.
It's just like, they always seem to be up. I don't know. It's like, you'd want to be like, hey, we're running a tight operation here. Like,
with some slack.
Southwest Airlines turning around the plane in 30 minutes. Like, just go. But, I'm sitting here as a complete outsider to the port industry. I've never worked in a port, never managed it. I'm sure I get criticized by people who have, saying I don't know what the hell I'm talking about, and they're right. But as a layman looking from the outside, it seems like it could be done better.
Now, these kind of ships that move these containers have historically just been getting bigger and bigger and bigger. When you look at them on the seas, they just look like giant floating cities almost. And you have a tweet like asking, like, will these ships keep getting bigger, or is the future going to be like smaller, maybe faster, more diversified ships? Like, where do you fall out on that question?
I'm really open. I don't know how it's going to play out. One interesting thing I didn't understand until fairly recently is that actually in naval, what do we call this? Like naval architecture, a smaller ship actually goes slower. The bigger the ship is, there's something about hydrodynamics, like it's longer than the wavelength or something.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
It starts to explain how these big ships can go faster than like a little speedboat. They're going like 25 miles an hour.
Like on a mass to water, mass to diameter ratio or something like that.
It's something about the length of the wave displacement, and if you're long enough to get across the the length of the wave, you can go faster. I'm not smart enough to understand the physics. I haven't studied it enough, but that is counterintuitive. So that the bigger ones are actually faster ships. Now, the reason that a smaller ship can get a shorter transit time is because they'll make fewer stops.
Right, and I assume they can unload and unload faster, so they can
unload faster, and not and like, look, if you have a container ship that's like only holding 3,000 containers, it's actually reasonably possible to say, hey, I could move 3,000 containers just between Shanghai and Long Beach.
Yeah,
but once you get to one of these 10,000 container ships, like you can't on a single day find 10,000 containers that need to move. So you're going to end up making stops.
I didn't realize that. So a typical big ship is making multiple stops along the way.
Yeah, like it's making a bunch of stops.
In Santiago, Chile, and then LA, and then Seattle or something?
Yeah, these are called strings. You can look them up. They're pretty cool. ONE is the Japanese ocean carrier, like the word one, ONE. Yep. And they have a nice thing on their website where you can see all their maps of their strings and see where all of them stop. Most of these carriers do, but they have nice like PDFs of it. And you can see they'll make stops. So it's called a string, and they'll stop they'll go maybe, I don't know, Shenzhen, Shanghai, Busan, Korea. Maybe they stop in Japan, hit the Prince Rupert up in Canada, Vancouver, Seattle, Oakland, Long Beach. And then loop back in a string. Whatever. That's a made up one.
So it's like an interesting loop. Okay.
Yeah, and so the bigger you get, like the harder it is to move, that much volume between any just two ports. The other problem is that the infra, again, coming to U.S. infra problems. Our container ports aren't big enough to handle the biggest ships in the world. Like even L.A. could only handle a ship about 2/3 the size of what Shenzhen, Shanghai, Rotterdam can handle.
Okay. So then what's the use of those big ships if they can't go
they
to
only
the
go
U.S.?
Asia to Europe. They just go Asia to Europe. They don't come to the U.S. right now.
Okay, got it. So they're just making these long journeys. Now, speaking of Asia to Europe, there's with all the stuff that's been going on with like the Houthis in Yemen and stuff like that. The transit time has been longer because people can't go necessarily through the Suez Canal, or it's more dangerous. So more folks are routing around. Like, how does that affect global trade?
Yeah, well, 90% of the container ships are routing around. The French ones are still going through, being protected by the French Navy, and some other kind of smaller companies are just taking the risk and going through. But 90%, more than 90%, are routing around. It's a reduction.
How do you protect if it's like because it's not like back in the day in Somalia, like there were like these pirates that come with boats and they board your plane. But if it's just like a missile coming onto
I think they can shoot them down. They can shoot down missiles. Okay. I guess, or they just take their chance. One of the interesting things, these missiles, they hit these ships, and then the ships like seem fine. They're like, a hole in the ship, whatever, keep going.
Okay, got it.
I'm exaggerating,
they're not like super destructive missiles. They cause a little damage, and
they haven't been sinking the ships. I'm sure they go into repair. I'm sure it's a bigger deal, but they're not sinking the ships, and many of them just continue on their way. But it is, it's crazy to sail through that and take that risk when you've got sailors on there. If someone was shooting missiles at my office, I would definitely work from home.
Totally.
And so they're routing around. It takes about 20% longer, which is a big deal for supply chains. Some of the manufacturers have had to shut down their lines.
And 20% longer, are we talking like, is that an extra week, an extra few days? Like, what is that in terms of time?
It's like 10 days longer, 10 to 15 days longer, depending on the port.
Okay.
It's enough to cause real disruption in the moment of the change. The bigger problem has been, that creates chaos. Our data systems, we like a lot of the data that we're tracking ships based on satellite data. Well, the first thing the container ships did was turn off their satellite transponders so that the Houthis can't hit them with a missile.
Oh, right.
Make them harder to find.
Yeah.
And so like the moment you need this data the most is like the moment the data stops flowing into the system. It created a chaotic weekend for us where we had to then refactor the algorithms to like factor in, okay, if they turn off the transponder and they're within this geofence area, then that's a signal that that it's being diverted or that something has happened here.
And is that the only way really to track ships? Like if they turn off their transponder, it's like, it's just too hard to find them?
It's the only way to track them algorithmic, whatever, like in an automated fashion. Well, the other way to track them is to, pick up the telephone and call the company that owns it and go, hey, where's your ship? When's it going to arrive? Which is what we do. We get updates by email, by phone, manual.
So someone just every once in a while, they just call in the coordinates or something.
We try to track in at least like what's the new route? Where's it headed? Yeah. What's the arrival date? They'll publish these schedules as Excel files and PDFs and stuff. And, it is a differentiator for Flexport is that we're a technology company, but we're a logistics service provider. And so we're not afraid to pick up the phone and add human updates and manually track these things and push updates to the clients. But so that satellite, that was only in the very beginning when they turned off the satellites if they were like really right in the region. What we're able to do, and we still had to update the algorithms for this, we want to be able to track the containers that are being diverted, the ships that are being diverted, so we can notify customers. New ETA, new transit time, new port perhaps where it's being dispatched to, because the whole string had to change. And we then had to go and build like detection algorithms or sort of geofencing areas and say, hey, if the ship is supposed to go, we expected the ship to go this way, and now it's headed south around the southern tip of Africa. It's non-trivial to go do that. We had to have our data science team really go work nights and weekends to go retrack, build new algorithms for track. We never really had that in our system before. We sort of like just, it followed the string. You didn't have to think about that. And so that was like a good example for us of kind of core value prop being put at risk overnight and having to work nights and weekends for like 3-4 days, kind of old school startup style, get the update out. And we updated our app that our customers use, and where it changes any ship that's been diverted because of the Suez incidents that are happening right now, turns orange in the system, and kind of,
Oh, that's cool.
you can see and then provide data communication to the customers, because they need to know each and every container on those ships has to get replanned. When is this thing going to arrive? What trucking company is going to pick it up? How's it going to clear customs? Many of them are getting transshipped. So like it'll bring a container to one port, unload it, and then put it on a different ship that's going onward. And all those journeys had to get replanned. Okay. So a lot of chaos. And where there's chaos, back to the original point, where there's mystery, there's margin. Price of freight went up 5x in the last 2 months as a result of all that.
For 5x?
For Asia to Europe, 5 times.
Holy mac, 400% increase.
Holy mackerel. It was, by the way, it was very cheap ahead of time. It was like too cheap. You could ship a container end of last year, November, you could ship a container from China to Europe for $800, $1,000. I mean, it's just
whole container.
That's a very good value.
Yeah. Okay, got it. Okay, so 5x. There was some slack in the system.
It was too low. It's gone way up. It'll come back down. There's a lot of excess capacity coming online. When you look at the data of new builds of new ships that have been on order and that are getting delivered throughout the rest of this year, there's 10% increase in the container shipping capacity of the world coming online in 2024.
And that's the main. Is that the one of the big constraints? I assume like the workers on the ship is not as big of a like the big constraint is the ships themselves.
I think generally workers, there's enough unemployment out there in the world that those jobs are reasonably good jobs for people. It tends to be a lot of people in the developing world that become sailors.
How many people like on these huge ships? Like sometimes you see there's like only a few people in the whole ship, like moving around.
Yeah, it'd be like 20 people on a 20,000 container vessel or 10,000 container vessel. 20 people.
And what do they do? Like, I mean, while I assume when they port, like they've got some things to do, like logistically, but like
they're doing
during the transit. Okay, maintenance,
maintaining the engines, painting. I wanted to do a blog post about it because people are always talking about the self-driving ship. I'm like, there's only one guy driving 20,000 containers. Like, focus on the truck. You need 20,000 truck drivers when they arrive, but the truck is like one guy's driving. The rest of them are painting. So I wanted to do an April Fool's post about the self-painting ship.
What are they painting?
Painting over the rust, like making sure it doesn't rust. Like you got to paint the ship.
So there's this constant maintenance on the ship. Okay.
Yeah. So I was going to do a blog post about the self-painting ship, just to mess with all these companies trying to get a self-driving ship.
Yeah, that'd be great, actually. Yeah. Okay. I didn't know if they were watching Netflix. Like I didn't know what was going on there. And then the mega ships, can they go through the Suez Canal, or are they constrained anyway? Okay.
They can go through the Suez. The Panama's been narrower, but they widened it to allow bigger ships. I think the biggest ships in the world still can't go through the Panama. It's possible that the biggest ships in the world can't make it through the Suez. The container ships are designed to be able to go through. I think there's some big oil tankers that don't. I'm not in the oil shipping business, so I don't know enough about it.
Now, speaking of like tracking ships, with all the sanctions against Russia and Iran and other things, there's a lot of people who are like trying to avoid sanctions. So they've got their own fleet of dark ships that are moving around that are doing things, especially with oil and other types of goods. Like, how does that all work? Like, like these ships are huge. I don't understand like how you can evade detection when you're like that big.
Yeah, no, I don't know anything about that. Honestly. Not lying. Hey, like it always interested me, the U.S. government coming out with like stealth ships and stuff. You're like, I mean, all they need to do is put a satellite up there and just have a guy watch you all day. Like, I don't know.
Like, is it disguised as a big whale or something? It's like, I just see a whale. Like, what are they doing? Like,
you can go into a cloud and like hope that they lose track of you during the storm or something. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. But I assume with like other things beside visuals, like other LiDAR and other types of spectrums, you should be able to still track it. But I don't want to. Now, there are people like Peter Thiel who basically say like the world is deglobalizing. Like, how do you expect global shipping will continue to grow? Like, where do you think that's going?
I wish Peter Zahan was less right all the time. He seems to have he makes a lot of predictions, so he's like net. He's probably makes a lot of wrong predictions too. I appreciate his willingness to make bold
Yeah,
predictions.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
I love
but
his books. Yeah.
he has had quite a few wins under his belt lately, including this latest Red Sea thing. It is an interesting question. In his perspective, is sort of until World War II, all of the world's shipping was basically done by colonial powers and kind of were protecting their own ships with their own navies to
Yep.
ensure safe transit. And after World War II, the U.S. Navy sort of took that on and created freedom of navigation. Anybody can go anywhere. You don't have to worry about pirates. And basically, as long as you're part of the World Trade Organization, your ships and, what is it called? The United Nations has a maritime organization too. Like if you're part of that, you're good to go. You can sail anywhere. And we're starting to see that maybe that's not the case. That now France is having to protect its own ships going through the Red Sea.
Yeah.
And if you don't have a navy, then you're going around. And so that's a bit of it's a challenge to the global order. And I think we take for granted how impactful and powerful the global order has been. The idea that companies can go global easily, find customers, find suppliers, employ people in other countries, make it cheap, and get all this cheap stuff shipped anywhere. But the reality is that ocean freight is so efficient and cheap that even with these changes, it's still cheaper to ship a container from Shanghai to Long Beach than it is to drive a truck from a factory in the middle of Mexico to the middle of the U.S. I mean, it's like trucking is just very inefficient, expensive. Mexico has crappy roads. Like sailing on the ocean is very efficient. You can visualize this. If you're a horse can carry like 300 or 400 pounds of stuff on its back, but a horse that's pulling a barge in a canal can pull 40,000 pounds of stuff.
Yes,
it's just way more efficient on water.
Yeah.
Than it is driving or pulling things. I mean, there's just a fundamental physics that makes ocean freight very hard to compete with.
Now, how do you come down? Like some of the things that the U.S. Navy has been protecting is like, China shipping to Europe or something. It's not like we're necessarily protecting goods that are coming into the U.S. or goods coming out of the U.S. or U.S. goods. And it's not like the China Navy is out there protecting their own stuff. Like they get to benefit from so where do you come down? Like, should China have its own Navy protecting, or should the U.S. be more constrained, or where do you come down?
Well, this is Zahan's whole thing. It's worth, if you haven't watched one of his talks, it's worth Googling and watching. He's got a lot of YouTube talks. There's plenty of them. They're all kind of similar. They're all great. He's a great speaker. But his point of view is that the U.S. created this order not for our own economic benefit, but to create a coalition of allies against the Soviets. And that, you only got to participate in this nice global trading order if you agreed to join our forces and create, a counter to the Iron Curtain. And that no longer mattered after the end of the Cold War. And therefore we continue to do this, even though it's not to our benefit, and that we're going to stop, that the United States Navy is going to stop patrolling that. That's his point of view. Reasonable, I think. I think that it's sort of a zero-sum world view. And I think that the U.S. does benefit from global prosperity and trade. And our companies are the world's best companies and are the ones that are benefiting. I mean, it's U.S. companies ship tons of stuff from China to Europe and sell. We're very big all over the world. We have global corporations that dominate almost every industry. And so we're, net, even if we're not involved in the trade at all, we trade benefits both parties, and everybody's made better off when that happens. So I don't know how to think about it. I don't know what the political will is to do it. But right now, in the old world, the U.S. or used to be the British Empire would invade Yemen, send in ground troops, and put a stop to this.
Yeah.
Nobody wants that anymore. So he's right in that sense. It's there's nobody wants to see the United States invade another Middle Eastern country and impose our will, even if they are insane people shooting missiles at civilian ships, committing acts of terrorism. There's just not the war on terror has gone for too long. People are sick of it.
Now, over the last decade, obviously we saw the rise of Flexport, which you lead. But there was a lot of other companies that got a lot of funding, like broadly in this space. There's Convoy, there's Uber Freight, there's a lot of other stuff that was around, some of which maybe did okay, some of which, did not have a good return for their investors. Like, walk us through, like, obviously it's a very attractive landscape because it's so big. So you have a huge TAM to invest in, but I imagine it turns out to be a much harder problem than people anticipated.
It's I just got back like 2 weeks ago in Las Vegas. There's a newer conference. I think this was the third year of it. It's called Manifest. It's like a logistics tech conference. I'd never been before. I just went. I was like blown away. There were like hundreds of logistics tech companies on display with booths and talks and everything. I didn't spend that much time looking at all of them, but just like the sheer quantity of it all was like, I was impressed. I was that 10 years ago, you couldn't have had a logistics tech conference. When Flexport would go to the logistics conferences, people would look at us like a bunch of idiot young kids. Like, what's going on with these people? Who are they? Why are they not a bunch of old white guys? Like, what's happening with this company? Why should we care? So definitely been a huge change in that. From an investor standpoint, I think it's just hard. Full stop. It's just like a very hard industry to make big change in. First off, like software only tends to come up short for some of the reasons I was describing earlier, where like software fails, you need to have humans go in and fill that gap.
And it doesn't seem like as an investor, if I would have looked at it 10 years ago, I thought, asset light, you can come in, you can do some things. But you guys raised like over $1 billion. It takes a lot of money to do some of these things. It turns out
it shouldn't. It should be. You should be able to build asset light businesses in this space that aren't as capital intensive. I think there was we raised a lot of money. I don't think we were that efficient in deploying it. We probably wasted money. We definitely wasted money in areas that we didn't need to. But it was a huge advantage for us. And like, I think there was a window there with the capital markets being what they were for the last decade, where we were able to raise a lot of capital and deploy that, use it for growth, use it to build durable, defensible, competitive. I mean, I think the return on capital will be there for our investors, but like, it was a moment in time that now you're not going to be able to raise that kind of capital again. I think Flexport benefits from the fact that we raised it. Most of the money's still in the bank. Like, we're in a good, now have a dominant position, at least vis-a-vis startups, and we're chipping away at market share, and we're the third largest freight forwarding company in the U.S. With aims to be number one in the next few years. But you shouldn't have to need that much capital. It's I think to do exactly what we do, you would need, but there's a lot of angles out there to build compelling software businesses. But the fundamental problem I tend to find is that the software only can't often solve the problem, and that you ultimately want to create.
Why is the freight forwarding business so have so many players in it? It doesn't seem like there's much concentration. I don't know the percentage market share that the number one have or the number two have, but it doesn't seem like it's super high. It seems like it's incredibly diverse and scattered. Like, why is that just something historical, or is there some sort of good reason that it has to be that way?
Yeah, I asked myself that question many times over the last decade. I would say I have two hypotheses. One is better for Flexport's narrative than the other. The first is, and the good one would be lack of technology. And so the number one player
is brokers.
And it's just very hard to drive scale into that without just hiring lots more people and training them and have a lot of expertise and it's hard to scale it. And so when you get to that point, you're like, I'd rather take a higher take rate rather than try to go for more market share. And so the largest players have almost 100,000 employees with their 4%, 5% market share. And so you're like, okay, let's 10x the business. Go for 30% market share. Well, now you got 1 million people, and they're knowledge workers. They're not Amazon pick pack workers. They're not Walmart store associates.
What do these 100,000 people do? Are they just on the phones all the time? Like, I don't understand. Like, what do you need 100,000 people for?
Well, we call it freight forwarding. I sometimes joke it should be called freight email forwarding. There's a lot of compliance. a lot of coordination, dispatching trucks, coordinating with the factory to arrange the pickup, setting an appointment with the warehouse to coordinate delivery.
So it's like a babysitter in a way. It's like it's a very hard.
Absolutely, it's kind of babysitting the freight and coordinating it all, making sure it moves to the next, forwards along the journey, and getting the data in parallel, communicating with the customer sales, a lot of salespeople, et cetera. So those are kind of the jobs that we've been steadily chipping away. So that, and what Flexport's doing, and give us hope to break that paradigm. And we do have definitely less employees per shipment, per unit of revenue, but it's and we think we're on the cusp of some real breakaways here, where you have taken a shipment, let's say a container that needs to move from door to door, and broken it down into a series of well-defined tasks that are now structured in a way that actually lends itself to automation. Because if I told you, hey, ship this container from here to here, OpenAI, ChatGPT is going to hallucinate some weird response. But if I say, hey, move this data from this database into this form, or from this spreadsheet into this database, it actually turns out to be pretty good at that. And so we're seeing a lot of potential to take those tasks that have been itemized, made into these structured atomic tasks, and have a software do them. So that's the positive narrative that's good for Flexport. The other narrative that's maybe less positive for a company like ours, why is it so fragmented, is that the ocean carriers, airlines, governments of the world don't want to have one big player that's dominating market share, and would prefer to have a fragmented industry on this coordinating layer on top. So we're very conscious of that, and saying, okay, how can we make sure that these carriers see us as a great ally for them? That we're reducing their transaction costs. We're willing to pay them more than the competition, because we make money.
They don't want you to have. They don't want you. If there's a lot of free forwarders, they feel like maybe they don't have a lot of. They have a leverage over them. They don't want you to have leverage over the.
You don't want to have one customer representing all your volume. You'd rather have hundreds of small ones, right? But I think the way that we address that is, one, there's a lot we can do with data to be a better partner for them. So we've dramatically reduced the cancellation rates. One of the biggest problems in ocean freight forwarding is that 30% of all the containers that are booked get canceled. The customers are constantly changing the production dates for the cargo when it's ready. I mean, it's just a nature of manufacturing.
I assume that you get a better price if you lock it in, you guarantee it or something like that.
There's not a lot of guarantees in the industry. It's like a lot of, and the contracts are done on an annual basis, not on a given sailing on a given day. And so,
okay.
But what we've done is say, okay, and this is a great case of machine learning, actually, is that if we get a cancellation, we get 1,600 a week containers that get canceled on average in recent couple of weeks. If we get that cancellation, instead of canceling to the ocean carrier, we'll find another customer whose cargo is ready and pull it forward.
Yeah, okay, that's cool.
And so now that customer is getting it. This is like an ML model that we launched in Q3 of last year. It improves the transit times by 20% because we're pulling other customers forward onto these canceled slots. And the ML searching for the cheapest container, the cheapest contract available that will hit the transit time that the customer's targeted. So it improved our net revenue by 2%. And it reduced our cancellations with the ocean carrier, so they're happier with us.
Yep.
So things like that. You're like, and then the other one is just generally like we have a nice trade finance business, Flexport Capital it's called, where we provide inventory financing to our customers. So if I can make money on other things besides ocean freight is kind of a commodity at the end of the day. I mean, it is a commodity. Yep. So if we can make money on insurance, customs, financing, then I've got a bigger margin pool. I should be able to pay the carriers more. And not be in such a zero-sum game, and they all, in theory, will be happier to have Flexport grow. But we're very conscious of the idea that, like, hey, nobody really wants. You have to make it clear in their interest for us to become big. Like, they don't necessarily want someone to be much bigger than the existing guys. Now we benefit. We're still only about 1/10 the size of the number one player.
Okay.
So they would like us to be bigger than we are, but longer term, I'd like to be 10 times bigger than the number one player. So how do you make that possible?
Now, I know that you really like this Paul Graham piece called Schlep Blindness. And What are some other like super schleppy industries that you think folks should be paying more attention to?
Well, it's probably anything that's very human intensive. But one framework I have for this is like kind of look at the human intensive things. People tend not to want to do that. It sucks. But another way to look at it is kind of take the global GDP graph by industry.
Yeah.
And look at the industries that have had. You could divide each slice of the pie chart by the number of hours of computer programming that have been applied to that industry.
Okay. Yeah.
And just be like, all right, this one is like huge industry. Not a lot of tech has been, applied to this yet. There's probably opportunity in that framework. It's a pretty simple framework, but it's very tough. Like the markets are pretty efficient. I go back and forth on this between like companies, existing companies are amazing. Look how profitable they are. And every existing company is run by bozos and they're terrible. I completely 180 on this like twice a day. And so it's hard to be, the hardest thing is now that I'm kind of working part-time, although I'm mostly just 110% at Flexport, but I am on the team at Founders Fund as well. Very hard to be contrarian and right. It's almost like doing that consistently long-term seems impossible. Like almost by definition.
Well, there's degrees of contrarianism, right? You could just say something's underpriced. Maybe people all believe it's going to be good, but you say it's underpriced or something, right?
Right. Yeah, fair.
It's like buying NVIDIA a year ago. It's like somewhat contrarian to buy NVIDIA. Everyone liked NVIDIA. You just said, oh, I just think it's underpriced or something.
Yeah, fair enough. But to be consistently right about that stuff is very impressive to see what some of these public market investors have done. And Peter Thiel and other great VCs, it's like, wow, they find a way to do it. I'm unconvinced that I'm personally capable of doing that, but
now speaking of like, so you at some point you replaced yourself as CEO. You brought in Dave Clark, who has a great resume from Amazon, and then you kind of came back as CEO. Like, kind of walk us through that journey. Like in retrospect, like what happened? What goes on, and what advice would you give to other founders thinking about those things?
Yeah, I would say I was looking for a partner to help with operational efficiency, and operations meaning like doing the same thing over and over again, a little bit better every time.
Those 1% improvements.
Yeah, that's kind of the name of the game for us. And I was looking for more of a COO. One of my recruiting hacks is I'll try to get in. Flexport at our stage has a lot of interest from investment banks that want to help. They'd like to take us public someday.
Yeah.
So if I'm trying to recruit executive, ask the investment banks. They tend to know a lot of people. Like, hey, so I asked the head of an investment bank, tech investment banking practice, like hey, I'm looking for the COO. Give him the profile. He's like, you know what? You should hire Dave Clark. And he introduced us. And it became apparent. Dave's got an incredible resume and background in operations and logistics tech. Like, it's hard to imagine someone with a better profile than that. And so became apparent that there weren't a lot of jobs that I thought I would do better than him at Flexport. It was like, well, okay, I'm become the chairman, executive chairman, and make Dave the CEO. Yeah. So that's what we did. I think lesson learned, and then 6 months later, our board, we missed earnings pretty bad. Our board was like, clear, we need to get back to growth and rein in costs and get on a track to profitability. Dave had been like very, very aggressive towards hiring and building the future and going all in, but like the growth wasn't there and the costs were going up. So the board asked me to come back. I'm on the board, so it was like I was part of that process, obviously. I would say, lesson learned. Well, one is freight forwarding is super different. It's B2B. Startups are very different. Like, we are capital constrained, and it's all about growth. And I think that's just a different landscape than at Amazon, another company. And then B2B is very different than e-com, where it's really about sales. It's really about I have to spend probably 50, 60% of my time helping with the sales process, with customers, meeting people, like driving deal volume. It's not this automatic flywheel where we just have to build the infrastructure and the demand will follow. We've got to get out there and sell and bring customers in. And that's the nature of startups, right? It's like you're capital constrained and you're completely focused on growing the business. as the CEO. And I think there was just like a different landscape where wasn't playing out. Our costs were too high, and our growth wasn't there. And so I came back 5 months ago. We've improved our EBIT by almost $600 million in the last 5 months, while growing market share.
Yeah.
And I actually think we've increased our velocity on tech, even though we part of that was we reduced the size of our tech team quite a bit.
Yeah.
Back to where it was before I left, before I became the chairman. So we sort of we look like idiots on some level. We went all the way up in hiring, and then let most of those people go. I feel
a lot
bad
of companies
about
are just doing the exact same thing during that time. Yeah.
It sucks. It actually caused me more anxiety and depression than I realized until after we got through it over the last couple of weeks, realizing what a weight on my shoulders that was of like having to let people go. But we, now with the P&L back to where it needs to be, the company's on track. We're growing market share, back to focus on the customers, on quality, and reforming the tech org to be like more narrowly focused on a smaller number of priorities. I think the velocities actually seems higher, objectively, like we're executing better because we are not trying to do so many things, fewer people, but more focused. And actually it's a good recipe for success, is like just be way more focused on smaller number of things.
Now, most CEO transitions, at least of like startups, like they just don't seem to work very well. Occasionally, you see ones that do work. Frank Slootman coming into Snowflake, accelerated the business. When Reid Hoffman transferred the CEO to Jeff of LinkedIn, that seemed to be good. But he had done a CEO transition like a few years earlier at LinkedIn and it didn't work, and he had to come back. So he clearly like was looking for someone, and the second time around it worked. Like they're really hard to do, and they often fail. Right, the default is that they fail.
Yeah, almost everybody congratulated me when I hired Dave. Only two people. One of them, they're both famous CEOs, so I shouldn't call them out, but both of them have had drama with their boards and stuff. I don't know. It was private conversations. I don't know if to say their names, but famous CEOs. One of them said 50% chance you're coming back next year. Everyone else is congratulating me. Hey, cat out of the bag. Hope you get,
good executive chairman. Sounds great.
Skiing,
totally.
Beach. You're going to
Be
love
strategic.
wine country.
Yeah.
He was like 50% you're coming back. First thing he said to me, I said, fuck. And then the other one called me and he goes, who did this to you? Like ready to go to war for me. I think it's a good lesson, actually just in general for entrepreneurs out there, is like having self-confidence, like your team is better than you think they are. You're better than you think you are.
Yeah.
There's not some executives out there that are going to save you. There's no saviors. You got to solve your problem. Your team, you're so much better promoting from within. Spend more time with your customers and in the presence of your team so you can see who's awesome in front of customers. Spend more time with the front line, like people writing code. Find that your job as the CEO is to find hidden talent within your company and develop them and promote them and put them into leadership positions. Was very inspired. Founders Fund invested in Neuralink, Elon's company, and they've got just young geniuses running that show.
Yeah.
And like Elon's just like really good at finding these people and putting them in charge of big things. And like next thing you know, like 24-year-olds are head of product or whatever, like crushing it. Got to meet a couple of those folks and just so impressed. It kind of inspired, it definitely inspired me to come back and go, man, I need to spend more time with the folks at Flexport so I can promote from within and not have to feel like you're hired from outside. It's like, it's a habit that I think comes through anxiety and fear. Sort of like if you're not spending enough time
the VCs are pushing it though. A lot of these are like, oh, you need to hire this type of salesperson or this type of product person too, right? Or no?
They like it when you do. Although my VCs was definitely like I got a lot of, because it was purely driven by me to hire Dave, and I got a lot of like, really, what? Are you sure? Like this is kind of like risky, but they were supportive, but they weren't. I wouldn't say they pushed it. I don't think the VCs know that much about building a business, by the way. So leaning on them is a little dangerous. Like they should be the first to tell you that. Even the ones who've done it before, they're probably the most humble about it all. it is risky to hire from outside. I think a lot of it's driven in my experience, not spending enough time really intimately familiar with the P&L. And that if you're deep in the P&L, you know what you need to achieve. You probably need to be cutting costs to go get profitable. But if you're not, you're like, hey, the way I'm going to get profitable is I'm going to hit these crazy growth targets and go massive, go big. You're like, oh man, that seems really daunting. I better hire a big time head of sales to do that.
Yeah.
And then next thing you know, it's like, if you're like living a little bit more peacefully with less anxiety imposed by insane goals that aren't actually achievable, or that, on the timelines, like you feel less inclined to have to go out and get help from outside. But or the opposite happens is like, man, our company was runaway success over the years, one of the fastest growing companies in the world for like a decade. And it's pretty hard to find internal people that can scale like that. And for you to have confidence in your team, you have to spend a lot more time with the team and trust them and recognize that, like, the grass is not greener. Like, your team, maybe they're junior, maybe they don't have that much experience, but they're loyal, they're hungry, they want to make it happen. Like, trust them more. So a lot of lessons can be learned the hard way.
The Speaking of Founders Fund, you and I are both big admirers of Peter Thiel. What have you learned from him since you joined and started kind of more working with him more regularly?
I just love the way he thinks very differently than anybody else. It's remarkable, his ability to distill ideas and distill like wisdom out of the ether, sort of like finding views. I don't know if he's right, but his track record seems to imply that he is, so you have to take it seriously. But the AI phenomenon right now, like watching him and analyze, think about distribution, how are these guys going to have competitive advantages, why Founders Fund's a big investor, not a big like in the scale of what OpenAI has raised, but they've invested in OpenAI, what I think is a large amount of money. But he does think that his views on an AI are kind of interesting, where they're kind of a feeding frenzy within VC land to invest in everything AI. And Peter's allergic to whenever he sees that kind of behavior of everybody chasing after something. And so his ability to sort of like go back to these principles of going, look, if everybody's interested in something, I'm not interested in it. It's very intriguing and very hard to recreate, right? Like, because the rest of us are going to get picked up in the mania of something.
Yeah, it's very against human nature. Humans like things that other humans like, essentially, right?
Yes. Yeah. And so his whole theory of memetics from Girard is like super interesting and got me very excited. But been like a really eye-opening, like new perspective of the world. 0 to 1 book is basically Rene Girard, philosopher, applied to startups.
It's the best business book there is, because it's short and it's just very easy to understand. There's a few core messages and it's super well written.
It's great. There's a great book called Wanting, which is about the philosophy of Rene Girard more broadly. And if you read that and then go reread 0 to 1, you'll see the underlying Girardian influence of 0 to 1.
Now, a couple of personal questions. You come from a family of entrepreneurs. I think you're like, mom's a biochemist, your dad's an engineer, but you and your brothers founded multiple businesses together. Like, was there something in the water about how you were raised?
Seems to be, yeah. I don't know if they did it on purpose or not, but like my mom, to pay my allowance, I had to deliver sodas to her office. I think she was getting a tax discount on her on my allowance or something like. And then my dad taught me to write software to like generate invoices that I could send to my mom's company so they could charge them. He would take me to Safeway and I would buy the sodas for like $4 a case and then sell them to her for $9. And then like when I was in middle school, I would sell blow pops, lollipops.
Oh yeah, I did that in middle school too.
Most entrepreneurs had some kind of candy.
That's hilarious. Yeah. 25
school.
Cents a blow pop. Yeah, that made me a lot of money.
I was the price discounter. I would charge 2 for 25 cents. I was
wrecking that market. You would have undercutted me. Okay, I'm glad you weren't in my middle school.
Other guys hated me. There was another guy selling them for 25 cents at the school, and he hated me. But yeah, they'd take me to Costco and buy them in bulk, and sell them around school. So Yeah, we were always had some kind of hustle. My brother, that was probably the bigger influence for me to become an entrepreneur. He's a few years older than me, and he was computer programmer in the and when he was like 14, before the World Wide Web came out, he had this like online game. They used to call them MUDs, multi-user door. Now they're called like massively multi. What do they call it? Massively, like World of Warcraft or something. But it was all text based. It was basically a text based version of World of Warcraft, and he had like 200,000 users dialing into this little like modem bank that he created. My parents had no idea what he was doing. He had the worst grades. He almost failed out of high school. He was up all night programming this, and they didn't realize that he was like this phenom that had like built all this crazy tech in the early 90s. And so he became an entrepreneur after really like when I was when he was still in college and I was in high school. I started like working together. When I graduated from college, I joined him at his company. We were buying stuff and selling it on the internet, kind of an early e-commerce company. So yeah, it was sort of always was in my roots. I really only had like one real job. I used to make pizza at Domino's when I was in high school.
Oh, nice. Okay.
But basically been an entrepreneur ever since that.
You learned a lot from those jobs, for sure, right? I served ice cream at TCBY when I was 14. You learned a lot from those things, yeah.
It's good, yeah. You learn some work ethic and dealing with a diverse and interesting team of delivery drivers from around the world.
Yeah.
I was sort of it always felt less risky to me to go make money on the internet than to get a job. I felt that if I got a job somewhere, I'd be miserable and I'd get fired. And whereas I don't know, working for myself, being an entrepreneur was never seen that risky. I saw my parents do it. I saw my brother do it. I don't know, something just didn't seem that risky to me.
All right, two last questions that we ask everybody. What is a conspiracy theory that you believe?
Oh my God. Well, I don't think Wikipedia is user generated.
You think it's a bot generated?
No, I assume that there's like intelligence agencies writing all this stuff.
Oh, okay, got it. So it's like a corporate or like actual governments that are interfering on it or something like that.
Special interests.
Special interest.
There's one giant conspiracy to run Wikipedia, but like I think.
Well, I definitely have people come to me, sell me services. Oh, I can move Wikipedia in certain directions. I'm like, I don't know if I want to participate in that. So there's definitely people out there at least selling. I don't know if it actually works.
And then, okay, my other one, the ultimate conspiracy theory is the origins of the word conspiracy theory in the first place. Because
this is good.
I mean, a conspiracy is just a group of people who are like scheming to do something. I mean, I'm involved in all kinds of conspiracies.
Of course.
Like my executive team is a conspiracy. We're
of course.
We're like working on stuff all the time.
Yeah.
So where did that get associated with crazy people? Why is it that if you believe in a conspiracy, you're crazy? Well, that happens with the JFK assassination. Was that the idea that there was a conspiracy, that there are multiple people involved in the JFK assassination? If you believe that, you must be crazy.
Okay.
Wait a minute. How did that become associated with craziness?
Okay, got it. Okay.
Interesting.
Right. Yeah, interesting. Okay.
So I was in Flexport has a big office in Dallas, and I have it's not very far from Dealey Plaza where JFK was assassinated. So I gotta go check it out when I'm in Dallas a few months or like a couple of years ago. And there's a guy, a conspiracy theorist, camped out right on the spot where he got assassinated.
Perfect.
And I think he's there every day. He was there when I went there.
Okay.
He got like his lawn chair and his rainbow umbrella that he's sitting under. He's selling magazines that he made about the
I like
assassination.
These guys. Yeah, totally.
If you're in Dallas, you got to go down there and talk to this guy.
I already know exactly how he looks. I can like picture it in my mind. Yeah.
He's a little overweight. He's wearing sweatpants.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah. Unkempt, white beard. You definitely want to go talk to this guy. So if you're in Dallas out there, I highly recommend. Hopefully he's there when you go. Again, I think he's there every day. Give him $20 for his magazine, and he will spend like as long as you want walking you around, telling you where. There was a guy hiding behind this fence, and there was some guys over here. Like,
oh my gosh! Yeah.
Highly recommend that. Conspiracy tour of JFK. And now, by the way, it's no longer crazy to believe that there was a conspiracy because the official CIA historian is on the record. Official saying that the CIA covered up what happened that day. That is
what?
official.
I had no idea.
That's now official on the record.
Oh my gosh.
CIA, there was a cover up. They did not participate in the Warren Commission's investigation fully. They did not share all of their information. They didn't say what happened, but they said that there was a cover up. So that's official. Now you're crazy if you don't believe that something else happened than what they're telling you.
Okay, got it. There's this whole you know this whole thing with Woody Harrelson's father.
Forgot about that.
So his father actually went to jail for killing a federal judge, and at some point, like, he insinuated he was involved in the JFK assassination, and it becomes this whole thing. Okay. Yeah. There's this whole other conspiracy that same guy is also Woody Harrelson's father is also Matthew McConaughey's father. So it's a very interesting thing going on. Yeah.
Trump accused Ted Cruz's father, I believe. Or no, that was the Zodiac killer. Never mind.
Yeah, exactly. All right, last question we ask all of our guests. What conventional wisdom or advice do you think is generally bad advice?
I think there's a conventional wisdom idea that micromanagement is really bad. And I'm of the view that, like, actually it's pretty good, that you should get really involved in all the details of what people are doing and try to understand everything.
That is very interesting. That has come up a few times on this thing. Where multiple people have said exactly what you've said.
I'm sorry to be so conventional.
No, it's actually not conventional, because, like, I would have never heard that just a few years ago. I think something.
I didn't believe it a few years ago, by the way. I'm not.
Something post-COVID maybe shifted people much more, and like the micromanagement sounds like a bad word, but into this direction where, like, you got to get involved in the details.
I wonder if it's just a zeitgeist shift of, like, it used to be just like growth at all costs and don't worry that much about the underlying details and cost profile of the growth and everything. And now you're like, wait, I need to cut costs. The only way to do that successfully without screwing up the business is, like, get very detailed, get involved in really what we're spending money on, what everybody's doing.
And when you read biographies, like whether it's like, John D. Rockefeller, Henry Ford, Andrew Carnegie, or even, Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, like, they're involved in, like, the most weirdest, minutest detail. Like, they're really, 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 really zoned in. So they're definitely, these guys are all, like, serious micromanagers.
But it's very hard to do, because you're like, the more senior you get in an organization, you're the CEO of the organization, the bigger it gets. Like, how can you be involved in all the stuff? Like, it's really challenging. So I do think, like, a lot of frontline employees sort of think that, like, managers just get to chill and oversee, like, don't have to do much because everybody else is doing the work. But the reality is, like, if you're running a good company, the people at the top have to work so hard to keep track of what everybody's doing, make sure they're doing a good job. Like,
and you don't want to be a bottleneck either. So you got to move things really fast as well.
Yeah.
All right. This has been amazing. Thank you, Ryan.
Yeah, man, this is great. My pleasure.
For joining us.
I didn't expect to get into my JFK. I didn't expect to publicly espouse my JFK theories, but
well, we got everything going on World of DaaS. By the way, I follow you. You have a great Twitter handle, so I follow you at TypeFast. I love that Twitter handle, and I definitely encourage our listeners to engage with you there. This has been a ton of fun.
Thanks, man. Yeah, it was great to see you. Hope everybody has a great week out there.
And if you're a super data nerd, go to worldofdaas.com. That's DAAS, worldofdaas.com, and sign up for our weekly Data as a Service news roundup newsletter.